When you rewire the nervous system, you actually become a different person. So you change your personality. All right? You shed the old self. When you do that, if you had a disease in the old self, it dissolves. So rewiring the nervous system is one way you can reverse the disease. You can also use it to create the life of your dreams. You can use it to advance relationships, right? Strengthen relationships in your life. You can use it for whatever goal you may have. So it's a very powerful tool that you can use in many facets of your life. All right, so how many of you have heard of fight or flight, right? Yes. What does it mean to be in fight or flight? Anybody?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Labels. I'm your host, Dr. Sina McCullough. And this week, Joel and I have something very special planned for each one of you. As you know, we just hosted our annual 2 Days of Truth Summit at Polyface Farm, and we had an amazing lineup of speakers. And what we want to do for this week and next week is to actually share a podcast that Joel and I recorded at the summit. Now, just to give you some context, the summit was all about building your resilience. That means resilience in your body, mind, and your spirit. And so my tip was to build resilience through rewiring your nervous system. And I talked about how to do that and why the majority of us could benefit from rewiring our nervous system. So just real quickly, if, for instance, you have a disease or an ailment, anything ranging from allergies to eczema, high blood pressure, an autoimmune disease, or cancer, when you rewire your nervous system, you can actually reverse those diseases. You can also rewire your nervous system to create the life of your dreams. So if you have a goal that you haven't been able to achieve, rewiring your nervous system is a tool to help you achieve that goal. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to kick it on over to our pre-recorded podcasts. And if you like what you hear and you want to hear more about these topics of resiliency that were discussed at the summit, Joel and I are releasing the online version of the summit, and that is going to be released on July 18th. So you will have access to that as well. And we'll let you know when it's being released again. All right, I hope you all enjoy it.
Welcome everyone to the Beyond Labels podcast with Dr. Sina McCullough, my guru nutritionist, and myself, Joel Salatin, the farmer of the pair. We are doing a special podcast today from the LLC at Polyface Farm, also known, which is LLC stands for the Lunatic Learning Center, as part of a 2-day shindig that we call 2 Days of Truth. And we've had numerous speakers dealing with unorthodox therapies, wellness protocols, and basically tapping Dr. Sina's lengthy relational guru list. And so it's been a real treat. Thank you all for being here and joining us with the podcast. We need to do this all the time. That's great, enthusiastic response. Okay, so Sina, today I think we're going to talk about rewiring your nervous system and fight and flight syndrome. You know, there's a lot of stuff to be angry and frustrated about in our society right now, and you know that we're dedicated to taking all of that negative energy, and instead of being frustrated and angry about it all, invert it so that we're creative and innovative, so that we actually create hope and help when everything is hopeless and helpless. That's right. That's what we're attempting to do. And so lead us off here. I know this is something you're dealing with actually in your family. It's very current. It's hot on your mind, and so we're ready to hear what you've got in mind.
Right. Thanks, Joel. So this conference, this summit, is all about creating resilience. Right? Our theme is providing you a toolbox so you can create a resilient body, mind, and spirit. And when I was thinking about what tools do I have in my toolbox that I want to share that I think creates the most resilience in my life, hands down, it was rewiring the nervous system. And as Eileen pointed out, and Eileen McCusick was our speaker before us, fantastic job. And as she pointed out, very astutely, when we say rewire the nervous system, we mean rewiring the biofield. It's not just the nerves and the neurons. That's our reductionist thinking in science. So this podcast is following the theme of this summit, which is really each speaker is giving you some tool to rewire your biofield. All right. So let me give you an example of something that's recently happened in my life. As you know, Joel just mentioned that I'm actively working on rewiring my nervous system as well as my children's nervous system. And we're going to get into what that means, but let me share my example. So this is a hypothetical example, okay? Let's say...
Of course it's hypothetical. We don't talk about real stuff here.
No. So let's say you decide you're going to move to a different state, all right? You find the house that you love, and then you put your house on the market. Your house sells on a Friday for a great price. You're totally happy. You're ready to move. 2 days later...
And you even feel like, oh, God must be behind this because it's being directed just amazingly.
That's right.
Everything's lining up.
Oh, it's hypothetical. So 2 days after your house sells, the house that you're moving into fails the inspection. You can't buy the house. Now you have to legally be out of your house in about 35 days. And let's say you have kids. Let's say it's 3 young kids. And let's say you have dogs, maybe 5, okay? Obviously, this is me. And you have no idea where you're going to put these 3 kids and these 5 dogs, right? Who's going to rent to you with 5 dogs?
Well, you have to put your husband somewhere, too.
Oh, and my husband, yes. He's easy. He'll sleep on an air mattress outside. So...
He can sleep in the doghouse.
That's right. Well, the dogs actually sleep inside in my house.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, imagine that's you. How would you be feeling? Frustrated, anxious, homeless, right? Very excited. Homeless, right? You feel homeless.
Yes. You'd be checking under bridges.
Yes. You would be pushed into a state of fight or flight, right? You would be, survival would kick in because you no longer feel safe, all right? Guess how I responded?
Perfectly.
I was calm and collect. My old self would have gone straight into fight or flight. I would have been freaking out. I would have ran to the computer. I gotta look for another house. Like, what am I gonna do? You know, calling my husband's parents, can we live with you? Like, totally freaking out. I was not. Instead, once we found out the home didn't pass inspection, I sat there and I said, isn't that interesting? And because I didn't go into fight or flight, I was able to tap into intuition, which for me comes from God, and He gave us another plan, a better plan. But that only happened because I've been working on rewiring my nervous system, or my biofield. All right? So today, I want to talk about what is a dysregulated nervous system or incoherent biofield, and why we have that, right? Most of us actually do have a dysregulated nervous system, and some tips to start regulating the nervous system. Great. Well, yay! Okay, and I want to start off by saying,
cows are like this too, because they don't move houses, but they are so much in the moment that they go from calm to scared to death in a heartbeat because they can't think it through like we can. And so there are actually techniques to let them know they don't have to be scared anymore. And that's what we do in animal handling, is to build trust with them. Wow. So it's a pretty cool thing. So you can rewire your animals to trust you more. As well.
That's fascinating. So when we get to the part about the tips, can you give the audience some tips for the animals? That would be amazing. Okay, and I want to share with you why I'm so passionate, first off, about rewiring the nervous system. Or I'm going to keep calling it the nervous system, but just know that what we're doing is creating coherence in the biofield, okay? When you rewire the nervous system, you actually become a different person. So you change your personality, all right? You shed the old self. When you do that, if you had a disease in the old self, it dissolves. So rewiring the nervous system is one way you can reverse the disease. You can also use it to create the life of your dreams. You can use it to advance relationships, right? Strengthen relationships in your life. You can use it for whatever goal you may have. So it's a very powerful tool that you can use in many facets of your life. All right, so how many of you have heard of fight or flight, right? Yes. What does it mean to be in fight or flight? Anybody? It's the reptilian brain, right? It's reactionary. What does it help you do? It helps you survive. It helps you get energy, right? You're either going to fight or you're going to run away. Now, when you're in that sympathetic state, that survival mode, your senses are heightened, right? You're on guard. You're looking for the danger. You have heightened awareness. You have elevated blood pressure, elevated heart rate, maybe shallow breathing. Your blood shunts to the extremities so you can fight or flight, okay? Acute fight or flight is good, and chronic fight or flight, as we know, is bad. So we know that chronic fight or flight can lead to disease, all types of disease. Numerous studies have validated this hypothesis. It weakens the immune system, makes you more susceptible to acute and chronic infections. It drains your energy, leading to fatigue. And it actually can lead to food and chemical sensitivities. So how many of you are sensitive to something? A food, mold, something? Yeah, it can lead to chocolate. There you go. It can lead to sensitivities.
Bureaucrats.
I feel sorry for you. Yeah, I'm sensitive to chocolate. Okay, so now what's the opposite of fight or flight? Rest and digest. And which nervous system is activated? Parasympathetic. What does it feel like to be in the parasympathetic state? Restful. It feels calm. Slow. You feel safe. When you're in the parasympathetic state, you become curious. You become creative. You're not worried. You have more energy. Okay. You know how to identify the two states. How much time would you say per day, what percentage of your time per day do you spend in fight or flight? Most of the day? Anybody else? Anybody want to care to throw out a percentage? 95? Yeah. Eileen, perfect. Less and less because people are working on it. That's fantastic. So what we're finding is that on average, people spend about 70% of their day in fight or flight. 70% of your day on average in fight or flight.
Does that have any relationship with how much news you watch?
Yes, it does. Yes.
I'm sure it does.
It does. It's because, right, your nervous system is affected by all the inputs that you provided. And news is Good news isn't sensational. That's right.
Bad news is sensational, so that's what gets the TV ratings. So.
That's right. And they're trying to trigger that survival instinct in you. They want you to be afraid. So when you spend about 70% or more of your day in fight or flight, we say you have a dysregulated nervous system. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more what that looks like before we provide some of these tips for how you can regulate it. Let's start with a regulated nervous system. If your system is regulated, what will happen is there's a stress, right, a threat, and you go into sympathetic state, and then when the stress is removed, you'll come back down into the parasympathetic state, okay? Very, very simple. It's a smooth pattern. The point is to remember, you complete that pattern. You come back to parasympathetic state, your rest state. If you have a dysregulated nervous system, you don't complete that pattern. Usually that happens when there's a trauma involved. Trauma, I don't really like to use that word because we tend to think of it as like, oh, it has to be something big, like a molest or a divorce. Trauma really is anything that overwhelms your nervous system. So it's very individualized, and it depends a lot on your current state, okay? So it could be, when I was a child, I watched the movie Jaws. It terrified me. So that was a trauma for me. I'm still afraid to get into the ocean because of the sharks. It could be you saw somebody get bullied at school, and that was a trauma for you. It made you feel unsafe, okay? So when the trauma occurs, you go into your first line of defense, which is your fight or flight, sympathetic state. That's the high energy survival state, right? The one that gives you the energy, you're gonna run or you're gonna fight that tiger. Because the situation was a trauma for you, it's too overwhelming for your body. So your body is so smart that it decides it's going to protect you. And so what it does is it starts to come into itself. It starts to shut down, collapse. We call that the freeze response, or the parasympathetic freeze, or the dorsal vagal response, or dorsal dive. This shutting down is another survival state. It's a low energy survival state. It's conservation, and it can look like fatigue. So what that means is when you go into that freeze response, you no longer can move through the coordinated, smooth, regulated pattern, right? So it becomes dysregulated. And when that happens, when you freeze, the energy that your body gave you to fight or flee from that tiger, it gets stuck in the body, right? Because you froze. You didn't fight and you didn't run away. So that energy gets stuck. And the message, right, Eileen talked about information, these messages that are carried on these frequencies. The message that it's sending to you is that there's danger. So now those chemicals are sitting in your body and they're deleterious to you. So when this happens, when the disruption occurs in your nervous system response, there's three different patterns where it can get, three different patterns based on where it gets stuck. And we're just going to briefly touch on these, and we're going to see if any of these resonate with you. So the first one is if you're stuck in the sympathetic state, the sympathetic stress state, that high energy state. This is usually people who are hyperactive. They're very productive people. They're really good at getting things done. They work really well under pressure. They're great in a crisis. They're very functional, high-performing people. They tend to be the overachievers, the type A personality, and they pretend to do things, so they prefer to do things by themselves instead of relying on others, and they typically have low self-esteem. So they will feel more anxious more of the time. So if you have like this low level of anxiety, this is being stuck in the sympathetic state. They may be more easily triggered or angered, and they can also be startled more easily. Like if my husband came around the corner and boop, I would, like jump. And so you're more easily startled. You're very restless. You can't really relax. So this is big in my family. Where like if we're gonna sit down to watch a movie, for instance, you'll see my sister over there doing her nails, you'll see my husband on his phone. We can't sit and be in the moment, right? We can't relax, we're restless. You have the hamster wheel thinking in your mind, which may keep you up at night. You're hypervigilant, and it could result in sleep issues and digestive issues as well. Also, I thought this was interesting. We're having this crisis of people not being able to absorb enough nutrients, right? We're getting micronutrient deficiencies. One reason is because when you are in chronic fight or flight, the cells are not in a state where they can receive because they're in a fear state, which is a contracted state. So if you rewire...
Is that an intake situation or a metabolism situation, or both?
That would be, so if you're eating, say I'm eating a nutrient-dense meal and I'm stressed, I'm eating it, but my body may not be able to pick it up, or if it somehow was able to absorb it, it's having a difficulty metabolizing it. Usually it's happening at the level of the absorption, is what we're finding out. And this is, we've heard of how you can eat a meal that was perfectly designed for you, right? No food triggers or anything. And if you're stressed when you eat it, it can inflame your body. So it's the same concept.
Yeah, in the whole kind of the organic foods movement, which we've been in for decades and decades, we have encountered numerous people that eat extremely well, all organic, and they're sick as can be, because we realized early on that some people are so fearful of eating perfectly that it actually gets sick eating perfectly because it consumes their mind. So that's where I came to the 80-20 rule. 80% good, 20% is the niece's birthday cake, At some point, you don't want to be a bore or a problem. Anyway.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's the stress. It's the stress that's involved with it, and we try to be perfect, and that's part of this type A personality too. We're stuck. That's one indication.
I'm a type A.
Yes, I say I'm a recovering type A. So, okay, so those are the characteristics when you're predominantly stuck in that sympathetic state. if you are predominantly stuck in the freeze, overwhelm, collapse state, it looks very different. And the freeze response is very misunderstood. Oftentimes people will tell me, oh yeah, it's when you actually freeze, like you're just frozen. And while that's true, you see this in the animal kingdom, right? Sometimes if an animal's trying to, if it knows it can't escape, it will just freeze. But in humans, this is also what it looks like. You tend to dissociate, right? You dissociate from your body. Like Eileen was talking about, we're trying to get into our bodies. Well, when you're frozen, you're trying to remove yourself from the situation, so you will dissociate from your body. So it may look like you're spacing out. Like, have any of you ever watched a movie and you're like, oh, what just happened? Like I didn't pay attention. Can someone tell me what happened? That happens to me all the time. Or have you ever been like driving somewhere, like driving home, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm already here, right? Anybody? Yes, so that is a dissociation. This state, you tend to be, instead of more anxious, you tend to be more sad, and more on the sad, depressed side. You tend to sometimes feel flat or numb. You might feel like there's a heavy rock weighing you down. You feel overwhelmed. You feel more exhausted, tired, heavy. You're not motivated to do things. Things seem very hard. And this is the state where you often, if you have pain, you've often gone into this collapse state, because physical pain numbs the emotional pain. So it's a form of escape. All right, so, and you're very guarded. You're very guarded in that state. The third pattern is a combination of those two. So this is the most common pattern, is that you'll go up into the sympathetic state and you'll come back down into the overwhelmed collapse state. And you'll ping pong between those states, very rarely going into the parasympathetic state. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. Of course, another totally hypothetical situation, all right? So you wake up, and what do most of us do? We have our to-do list, right, of what we're gonna do that day. So you start going over it in your mind, the checklist, I'm gonna do this, and you start out feeling good, right? I've got energy, I'm gonna do my stuff. So you're going through your checklist, whatnot. Then maybe by late afternoon, you might get a little tired. This is when people start reaching for coffee or some kind of stimulant. But if you don't do that, if you reach for the coffee or the stimulant, it will push you back into the sympathetic state. If you don't do that, you'll go down into the collapse state. And of course, there's varying degrees of these states, okay? So what was a typical thing for me is I would get up and I would go through my list. I'm getting my stuff done, checklist, and it feels good to do that because I'm a type A. I'm getting things done. I'm getting that dopamine hit by checking off my tasks. Mid-afternoon, I'm tired. I collapse. I'm like, nobody asked me for anything. I'm gonna sit down on the couch. And that's usually when I'm like, I'm gonna watch one of my girly shows for a few minutes, or, like totally space out. And I need that reprieve. So if my child comes up to me, I have 3 young kids. If my child comes up to me and asks, can you go get me a glass of water? Now I'm irritated, right? I'm in this irritable state. I'm like, I don't have anything else to give. And I become snappy. Like, can't you get the water yourself? I just sat down, So, am I the only one? Does this sound familiar to anybody? Right?
They wait until you sit down.
They do. They wait until you sit down. They know.
It's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy.
Or they wait until you're on the phone, right? And then it's like, mommy. So this is a very common pattern amongst us. And this is why I say this is the best tool I can share. Because when you learn what a dysregulated nervous system is, you realize I don't know anybody, except maybe Eileen, that does not have a dysregulated nervous system. I've never met anybody that does it to some degree or another, okay? So before we talk about how you can rewire it, I want to share why does this happen? Because I think you need to know the why, wouldn't you agree, Joel? Yes. In order to intuitively know how to fix it. So we'll quickly touch on this one so we can focus on solutions next. So why do we spend most of our time in fight or flight? Sympathetic state means you feel unsafe. Parasympathetic state means you feel safe. So we're walking around on average 70% of the time feeling unsafe. Why is that? So did any of you see, or were any of you here last year, or did you see the online version of the summit? Anybody? Oh, good, quite a bit of you. Okay, yay. So last year, if you recall, I spoke about my perception that all disease stems from the emotional energetic level.
Yeah.
All right. So, and by the way, if you haven't seen that summit and you want to see it, it's still online, and Joel and I are offering it at 50% off. So with the coupon code is Polyface2021, you'll get 50% off. So everything starts on this emotional energetic level. And last year I talked about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And do you remember what those were?
It's an acronym.
Yes. Do you remember any examples? Good, Joel. Good. All right.
A lot of water over the dam since last year.
So it wasn't that impactful, apparently.
Sina puts me on a spot like this.
Okay, so it's basically the unresolved emotional traumas will put you in a state of chronic fear. Okay, and so I'm not going to dive too much into adverse childhood experiences because I have a new one I want to share with you, but these would be things you experienced in childhood, like me watching Jaws, or your parents got a divorce, or you were molested, or your parents had financial difficulties. Anything that was a trauma for you can be an adverse childhood experience. And what the studies are showing is that the more ACEs you have, the higher your risk of disease. And in fact, so you know now studies have shown that smoking is highly correlated with lung cancer, right? Everybody knows that? Smoking is highly correlated with lung cancer, okay? Strong correlation there. What we know is that ACEs are even more strongly correlated with disease than smoking is to cancer. So this is a huge topic. So last year, people came up to me after the summit and said, I love what you said, but I didn't have any childhood traumas. So the theory that childhood traumas are a root cause of disease can't be true. And I love that question, right? We have the best audience. They don't just sit there, they engage and they question things. We love that. So what I would say to that is sometimes the memories are suppressed. That happened to me a lot. So that's a whole nother category. But what I also want to address is it's not just childhood traumas. There's another category of traumas that happen during when you're in the womb and up to about 2 years of age. These also contribute to making you feel unsafe and putting you in chronic fight or flight. These are called attachment traumas or attachment disorders. Okay, so when you're a baby, in utero and up to around the first 2 years of life, you actually can't regulate your own nervous system. At least we don't think you can. So you can't properly go into fight or flight and come out of it. And so who's going to be your template, right? The mother, exactly. The mother is going to model what a nervous system should look like for that baby, okay? If there's a secure attachment, it means that that baby has co-regulated properly with the mother. If there's an insecure attachment, there's not been proper co-regulation. So let me give you an example. In utero, if the mother experienced a lot of stress in utero, the heartbeat's going to go up, right? The heart rate's going to go up. That sends a signal to the baby's developing nervous system that whatever environment I'm about to go into is scary. There's threats out there. So it will rewire its nervous system to accommodate for the stressful environment that it thinks it's going to go into. The aorta actually descends on either side of your abdomen, along both sides of the uterus. So when blood pressure increases, and the baby can hear that, so the nervous system responds to the increase in the blood pressure, and it creates the nervous system that's wired to deal with that stress, okay? Another example is after the baby's born, if the baby didn't have proper time to co-regulate with the mother, say she went to work too early, like a couple weeks after the baby was born, she went to work. The baby now can't co-regulate with the mother. And what happened with my children is, and I think this is a common one, is that when the mother, in the first 2 years of the child's life, when the mother is checked out, so she has a dysregulated nervous system herself, okay? So she's physically present, right? Like I homeschool my kids, physically present there, but emotionally unavailable. Because I'm in my own dysregulated state, pinging back and forth from sympathetic to overwhelm. The baby learns to train their nervous system to mine. And so now they have developed a dysregulated nervous system. So the mother's nervous system is literally the template upon which the baby's nervous system is designed. And the way, what that means, if you don't have this ability to come out of fight or flight back into the parasympathetic state, what happens is you can't self-regulate. And so you find coping mechanisms to be able to get yourself back into a somewhat form of parasympathetic state. So for some of us, that could be binge eating. So eating actually stimulates the vagus nerve, which helps calm you down. It could be shopping. For me, it's working too much, right? That's my escape. When things get dysregulated and I start to become very incoherent in my mind, I would just go and work. And people ask me all the time, how do you get so much work done? I'm like, it's not a good thing. You know, it's actually a coping mechanism, so I don't have to deal with my life, you know? Your coping mechanism, maybe you keep busy. You jump from one project to the next. You may not even complete one project, but you're jumping from one thing to the next. Maybe you take on too many tasks. You're the yes person. A child may cope by hanging upside down on the couch, right? Having the blood rush to their head. Often, children who are irritable or sarcastic, it's often a result of a dysregulated nervous system. So the point of this section of the podcast is that most of us have these dysregulated nervous systems. They were usually developed in the womb and early childhood, and it sets you up for later in life to be susceptible, to be less resilient, okay? So what we want to now focus on is, how are we going to rewire it?
So this really, the idea of legacy is a big deal here, isn't it?
Yes.
You can't just, the sins of the parents often, transfer to the children, or the bad habits or the problems. And so it does make a tough situation when the parents have such a dysfunction,
Yes.
a home dysfunction. Maybe there's only one parent. Maybe anyway, we've talked about that. So you come into life as an infant behind the 8-ball.
Yeah.
That's the problem here. You're not tabula rasa, right? Clean slate. No, you're already, you got 3 errors.
Yes.
And that really changes it.
It's true. So, doctors were perplexed for a long time. I was born constipated. Like, I never had a regular GI tract, until I healed myself. But when I was born, I was instantly constipated. And that stemmed from a dysregulated nervous system. That it was the template that my body built based on my mother's nervous system.
Well, just think about how, and we're gonna have to close up here. Are we gonna wait till next podcast to give the solutions? We're really out of time.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
From a type A to a type A.
Yes.
Well, what I was thinking, maybe we need to just wait till next podcast to go to all the positive stuff.
Sure.
But the kind of takeaway here, I mean, think about the self-reinforcing situation here, where you got a dysfunctional thing going on. So the baby now has colic, whatever kind of issues because of dysfunction. Well, what does that do? Well, that creates more stress on the parents
who are probably
already dysfunctional, and it just becomes a really downward spiral.
It's so true. It really, like you said, it highlights the importance of the legacy, because you not only are passing on your nervous system function, but you pass on your biofield, right? The nervous system is part of the biofield.
Right.
So you pass on, as we talked about last year, there's energetic imprints in the biofield, right? Emotions are energy, and they're stored in the biofield. You can pass those on to your children. So in learning all of this, what my conclusion was, one of the best gifts I can ever give to my children is to first, it's like in the airplane, put the mask on yourself first, right? Not the mask. No mask.
The oxygen.
The oxygen. Put the oxygen on yourself
thing.
first.
Now you have to take your mask off first.
Yes.
And then put on the oxygen.
Yeah. No. So, one of the best gifts I can give to my children is to first regulate my nervous system and then to teach them how to regulate theirs.
So deal with me before you.
Because they will still feed off of mine.
Yeah,
even
that's
though they're older.
probably a good positive note to end on. We haven't given the solutions yet, but at least it's good to know that if I work on me, it will automatically help you.
It will.
That's a very powerful, profound thought.
Because you're sharing the biofield.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for sitting through this, for enjoying
As though
this.
it's torture.
No, thank you for joining us on this podcast, and we're looking forward to next week where it'll be less of the digging into the problem and more offering solutions. So stay tuned. We'll see you next week.